For more than a year, states have been engaging in bidding wars to try to get Amazon to agree to bring their new headquarters to their states. Last week, Amazon announced that the winner was New York. The city is going to be giving the company subsidies that total well into the millions, including roughly $48,000 per job created. That's the cost here. It's not just New York, it's Virginia as well. Well, the rest of the story is when you actually do the analysis, the city or state usually loses in a big way. So they have all this history. This isn't guesswork anymore. Right. They know the numbers. They can look at historically, you know, they just go down the line, whether it's Boeing, whoever it is, they year after year see the numbers, and they did it again here, right?
It's hilarious that they never learn their lesson, and at the same time give away everything that we could be using. Look, New York, just to go back to that for a second, $48,000 per job created, as you pointed out. In Virginia, $22,000 in subsidies per job created. The total number is going to be about $2.4 billion in subsidies. There's got to be something better in each of these states that we could have spent $2.5 billion on, but instead, the governments that tell us we can't afford universal health care, debt-free college, or even infrastructure repairs, instead they say, well, of course we have billions to give to this multi-billion-dollar corporation, and they fall for it every time.
Okay, and here again, I can't stress this enough. Look at the history every single time the city or state loses. So, but why does it happens because the politicians that are making it happen, like Cuomo, for example, great example in New York. What did he say? He wants to change his name to Amazon, or
right.
Rather than Cuomo, he's going to be Amazon. Why did he do it? He did it because he's running for something else. He wants to be a senator. He wants to run for president. He wants to say, look what I did for you. And then by the time that everybody sees that it's a disaster, that it's an economic disaster, he's moved on to the next political position. If you take a look at almost every time this has occurred, that person who's up front, they might have been a governor, they might have been a mayor, look what I've done for you. And then 5, 6, 7 years later, everybody looks at us and says, my God, this is terrible. Look, New York doesn't even have, their subway system is crumbling. Their infrastructure is in such bad shape that they don't even have the money to get that right. So now they're going to give these huge multi-billion-dollar subsidies to this trillionaire, okay? Bezos is a trillionaire, and they're going to give that money to them.
Well, it happened recently with Foxconn up in Wisconsin. Same type of deal. We're going to give you millions and millions of dollars. You're going to bring in a few jobs. Oh, didn't really pan out for the government. Foxconn made off like a bandit. Happened recently in Alabama.
Talk about Foxconn a little bit more. Foxconn was this Chinese company. Right. They're coming to town. Oh, we're going to do all this stuff for you. They came to town, and then they said they're going to give you all these employees. They're running it by robots. Yeah. There are no employees. There's no tax base coming out of this.
And similar thing happened a year or two ago with Alabama. They were fighting really hard. I forget which company that was. But same scenario. We give you all these tax subsidies. You're going to bring so many jobs. Oh, well, most of them are automated. Most of them are, kind of bookkeeping. Right. We've got some janitors that are people, and those count. Right. We get the subsidies for that. Yeah. But there have been books written about this, how corporations always do this. They start bidding wars, usually
state to state.
Yeah, state to state, city to city sometimes. Yeah. And in many instances, the company doesn't end up taking either, but they get subsidies and tax cuts that apply to their other operations in the state. Well, first of all, before I say this, go look at the Boeing story, the Nike story, the Intel story, the Dutch Shell Company. Look at these stories. Every single time the entity is bazoogled, and all of a sudden they lose all this money. Now, what's interesting about this company, because you know what I think about Bezos. I think he's a pariah. So Bezos owns the Washington Post, right? He sets up these stories in the Washington Post that he owns to try to make it look like all these other cities are paying. They want to pay $7 billion. They want to pay $9 billion. They want to pay $10 billion. And he starts this frenzy through the Washington Post that he owns. And he creates this bidding war for him to come to town to extract everything that he can from these locations.
He's not going to spend a dime on Subway. He's not going to spend a dime on infrastructure. He doesn't care about the schools. He doesn't care about housing. You know, time and time again, they've asked these companies, can you do something about helping us with the homeless? That's a great example. Bezos up in Seattle was asked, can you help us with the homeless? Because we've got a homeless problem up here. He says, no, we don't have enough money to do that. Okay, so look, I want to spend some time on this. I know we got some other segments. I'm going to spend some time on this. There's ways to handle this. First of all, they could go at it with the Commerce Clause. Supreme Court hasn't ruled on it. It's gone up to the Supreme Court. Sixth Circuit took it up there, and they were right on the edge of saying, you know what you're doing here actually might interfere with national commerce, because you're taking business away from Alabama and you're trying to move it to Florida, for example.
Right.
The other thing they could do is the federal government could say, we're going to tax your subsidies. See, subsidies are income. It's purely income. So we're going to tax your subsidies. Now, what's the chances of either one of these things occurring?
Unfortunately, very, very low. But with the Commerce Clause, when we look at these states and cities and whoever they are paying billions of dollars to get a new business to come in, whether it's an Amazon headquarter, they do it with Walmarts and Targets and Best Buys and fast food chains even give them massive subsidies. What you're doing is you're out there, you're the ones who are interfering with capitalism and the free market. There's no free market in the United States, and it's because we don't want there to be one. We want the government and corporations into one entity where one scratches the other's back. Nothing works for the consumers. Nothing works for the citizens. It's all for the politicians and the CEOs, and they're the ones reaping the benefits.
I'm going to spend more time on this. I know we got other segments. I'm going to choose to spend more time on this because the Bezos story is important. Okay, I want to take you back to the story that you covered. Both of us have covered on the propaganda machine. Let's start with the propaganda machine. Let's talk about the idea that the federal government in 2013 came in and they said, we want an entity in the United States that we can use for propaganda. You remember that?
Yep.
I mean, they said the reasons were absurd. The reasons were absurd that they said, we need a propaganda machine. For example, they've used the propaganda machine against this very network. They've used it against the Chinese television. They've used it against entity after entity. It's a propaganda machine that they put in place. The government pays for this. Now, here's where Bezos comes in. Washington Post is part of that propaganda machine. If you look at the stories that come out of Washington Post, then you ask the next part of it. The next part is the defense industry's relationship to Bezos. Okay, so Bezos wants to chum up a war because he's mad about China, right? Government calls Bezos, let's start it on Amazon, let's start it in your Washington Post. Let's get the weapons industry what they want. And they want to chum up conflict, just like they're trying to do with Russia right now, like they're trying to do with China right now. Bezos is very much a part of that propaganda machine. I promise you that's what's going on. Now talk about the contracts, the governmental contracts that Bezos gets.
Well, exactly. I mean, that's Bezos' biggest dog in this fight, and that's one of the reasons he loves to have Washington Post pushing for war. Iran is one of the biggest ones they're pushing for war with at the moment, too. But it's because Bezos and Amazon are one of the biggest tech contractors for the federal government. Right now, it's down to the wire for them. They're likely about to win another $10 billion contract.
Okay, talk about that contract. Right. It's so important. And here's why. Look, this is a contract that you store all of the United States and world information in your cloud.
All the secrets.
Right? Okay.
All the secrets.
What do we know about Bezos already on that?
Well, he's been doing it for years already for him. He knows the infrastructure. He knows the players. He knows who he has to work over, and that's what he's doing right now. So they've already pulled in billions. That's actually one of Amazon's #1 sources of income, even more than people going to the website and buying a new hammer. It's these government contracts that have flown under the radar, partly because the guy also owns one of the biggest media outlets in the country. So obviously they're not going to be talking about it. So nobody else covers it either.
Okay, and to me, what the sad part of this story, I mean the pathetic part of the story, is when Obama put in place this propaganda machine. It was Obama. It was Democrat, Republican, and Obama. When you take a look at the two politicians that came forward with this propaganda, where the government is allowed to pay for propaganda in the United States, if they want to chum up a war, they have the right to do it. And if you look at the actual bill, it is astounding. And if you have any doubt, I mean, anybody watching this, if there's any doubt, go research this. And it's scary, because in the actual bill, they talk about the idea that the federal government should be able to do what they want where it comes to creating narratives about conflict. They actually use words like that, create narratives about conflict. Bezos, when we jump back to him, what did he do? As soon as he was given the part, they're paying the Washington Post. I promise you, the Washington Post is part of that propaganda machine. You're also seeing it in a lot of social media. When you start seeing these stories that you're looking at what should be a progressive site, and all of a sudden the progressive site is talking about, damn Russians want to go to war with us. China wants to go to war with us. We got to get ready for war. Where has this gone? This has gone to where the weapons industry that actually pushed for this legislation, by the way, the weapons industry did. And now Bezos is the tool. He's their boy. He is the guy that, how about doing this for us? Washington Post does it tomorrow.